They are dancing with open containers in the street. And I kid you not, like feet from where they were is the police station.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Grieving Eucalyptus were a three-piece band from Berks County, PA. They combined the sounds of Buddy Holly, garage rock, and pop-punk groups like the Buzzcocks and Rezillos. Actually, it was written punk pop, but I don't know if that's what he meant. This is a write-up that Angelo gave me when I asked him what to say about the band, and this is all he said, so I'm sticking to it. This band has come up a few times in previous interviews, like Chuck from Weston, Josh from the Overdrives, Arik from Creep Records, Jessie from Weston, and a ton more. Actually, to be honest, I forget exactly which interviews they were mentioned in specifically, but you can go back to the episodes I mentioned, or anyone's that are from PA, and you can listen to those and let me know. After some scheduling issues on my part, I finally got Angelo on the Skype, and this is what we talked about. Who from the PA scene did he go to college with? Skinheads in the scene, getting on Kevin Second's record label, the scene in Western PA, his letter to Superchunk, his band Sadaharu, the Every Time I Die story, his record store with his wife, and a ton more. If you're in the Lancaster PA area, you can check out his brother's record store called Mr. Suit Records. You can find him on Instagram at just instagram.com/Mr. Suit Records, or just open up Instagram and look that up, and then you can find his record store. I'm going to make this quick before I jump in. So 3 ways you could support the podcast. 1, go to patreon.com/thiswasthescene, and you can sign up for $1 a month. 2, you can donate one time on thiswasthescene.com. Just scroll down on the homepage. There's a purple button, and you can click that. 3, you can buy merch on thiswasthescene.com, and Christmas is coming up very soon, and so that should be a nice little gift for yourself or your loved ones. And finally, before I begin, one quick way that you can help the podcast for free is just to share an episode or a link to the website or a link to the Instagram page, a link to the Facebook page, whatever is easiest for you. Just go to that source, copy the link, open up your phone, find a friend who likes shit like this, send it to them and say, I think you'd like this. That is a free, easy way to help this podcast grow and helps me keep doing this because the more people are interested in it, the more there's a reason to keep doing these interviews, and things are going pretty well with that. So that is, again, a free way to help. So please do that if you choose to. And that's it. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. Well, thanks for all of the back and forth to try to get this thing to happen.
Hey, that's okay.
Yeah, it's been I've been luckily busy. This is like the busiest I've been since the show. What do you do? What do you do these days?
I work in Manhattan. I run the paintings department at an auction house. Oh. So that means that I build auctions and appraise things and auction fine art. So yeah, I'm dealing with multi-million-dollar estates and things like that, and building auctions. So it's suit and tie thing.
How's that been going? Since usually that's a in-person thing.
Yeah, the whole industry really moved online. So right now we've been having auctions where the auctioneer is on a video screen, and we can still do everything the normal way that we've done it. The only thing we can't do is have people physically in the room with paddles bidding. Uh-huh. So everything's done through phone or internet or things like that. So, it's been going shockingly well considering.
I mean, it makes sense. It's like you can now broaden your audience to across the globe, I guess, technically, instead of just having them have to be in Manhattan.
It's one of those things where, because of the company's been around for almost 60 years, and we have maybe 40 different nations bidding in any given sale. But definitely since this has happened, and not just for our auction house, but for all the auction houses, there's been more of a global participation. More people are following it. A lot of it is driven because a lot of the art galleries are not really up to speed yet. Definitely the art fairs aren't happening. So the industry's looking more to the auction world just because it seemed to um, it seemed to fit itself in better.
I'm so fascinated by where like everyone is now, right? Because
Hmm.
I mean, this is going to be the 115th episode, I think. And
Okay.
so I've
Yeah.
been basically living in the late 90s now again for the last 2.5, almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years in March doing this. So, like, this is constantly on my mind because by thinking about who to reach out to and who I want to talk to and setting the stuff up and then like re-listening to all these stories all the time. So I'm constantly in it, but I've never thought about asking someone who I'm interviewing, like, how much of that time do you still think about
Oh, sure. Well,
prior to this
it
podcast
all,
coming out, actually?
yeah, no, it all kind of ties together in that um, these were my college days as well. I went to Kutztown University, so it wasn't a far drive from, Lehigh Valley shows and things like that. There were a lot of other people in bands that you would know who went to Kutztown with me at that time. It's more just the decade of the 90s that for me it's just all part and parcel of.
Well, real quick, who from that scene went to college with you, or no, like went to Kutztown?
When Yeah, when I got to Kutztown, that was like 93, 94. Obviously, I was a freshman. In his senior year was Jack Ball, who ended up starting the label Coolidge. They did that. They did a comp with Bouncing Souls and things like that, and released a lot of other things. They did the Descendants covers comp.
Yeah, I interviewed Jack actually.
Oh, great. So Jack was there, and he had a band called Sponge God with Kevin Cooper, who Kevin went on to be in Bobby Cork and Wally and Tall Man and probably five other bands, and really knew everybody. He introduced us to Plow we had at the radio station where we were all at. Once a year we'd have this event called Geek Fest. So it was, big thing on campus where, 50 bands would play or whatever. So he brought Plow over, and that's how we all met them. And then they started playing Allentown. So everything kind of came through Kutztown at a time in a way. The Jazz June went there. The
Oh
guys from
wow, yeah,
Atari and Blindside.
okay,
The guys from Bug Light.
yeah.
Um, there was a band called Crop Circle who played Allentown every once in a while, but they were maybe a little older. They were more of like a surf rockabilly band who were really really great. I'm sure I'm missing a few. Rain on the Parade was a hardcore band. Um, it's probably everybody that I can think of. I'm sure I'm missing a few.
Wait, so this is like the crew that went to Kutztown.
Yes.
Did you guys like hang out, or did you just know that
Oh,
they
all the
were
time.
there? Oh,
Yeah.
that's so crazy.
It was, I think everybody kind of glorifies their college days, and there's this whole kind of Animal House attitude and things like that. But really, when I was there, it was like every morning you'd wake up and wonder what the adventure was going to be for the day. It was just a nutty time. So one time, President Clinton came to speak at the school. Days beforehand, the Secret Service came in and they had this sort of orange netting that they had on big rolls. It was like orange plastic. And they made all these corridors where you could and couldn't walk. And they were stationing snipers on the roof and all sorts of things.
Jesus.
And then, Clinton speaks, he leaves, and they abandon miles of this orange netting. So I had a station wagon. It was me and the guitar player from Bobby Cork, Weller, and a few other guys. And we decided to go and steal all of this netting. We weren't stealing it. It was just the band. It was just going to end up in the trash. And then we had it, and we were like, well, what should we do with it? And they lived in this house that had a 2-car garage where we'd have these big parties that bands would play, including, my band. And we'd even have some of them were friends of the Bloodhound Gang
Oh, okay.
from Westchester.
Yeah.
They were on their demo tape or whatever. And, but it same thing, 5, 6 bands and all that stuff. So we decided to take the netting and build the Thunderdome from the Mad Max movie.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had rigged up with bungee cords that you could wear. So yeah, we had like a round robin thing where we beat each other up, and we had, obviously we couldn't kill each other, so we had balloons, water balloons in the chests of these pieces of football padding.
Yeah.
And if you broke the other guy's balloon, the guy was out. So we did that, and probably bands played after that. But yeah, we tried to put like Nerf foam around hockey sticks as if that would soften it, and it didn't. It really hurt. But there's videotape of that somewhere.
You guys, I every scene, if I really, from doing so many, like talking to so many people, there's a certain mindset or personality, I think it's a better term, in all of these pockets around the country back then. I'm sure even now there's scenes around which have figured out, like there is shit still going on, which is great. And it's just this whole, obviously a new way or whatever. But different, like Chicago, you'd go there, and every time we'd go there, we meet people. It was like I knew they were Chicago people. We were in LA, like we knew they were LA people. We were in Florida, like we knew they were Florida people. And like Eastern Pennsylvania, like you guys were so, like you guys had such a funny personality. Like you guys were the quirkiest, funniest dudes. So this makes sense to me that you guys would do shit like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Not that most of the people from Kutztown would have known Weston personally, but Chuck from Weston kind of embodied a lot of that.
Yeah.
Jessie Short,
Yep.
same deal. So yeah, a lot of the time that I spent was at Kutztown with my friends who may or may not have been bands, but also obviously the band I was in played a ton in the Lehigh Valley. Yeah, a lot of fun people to hang out with.
Yeah,
And,
you guys are just funny fucking people. I mean, it makes sense too because you talk about the Bloodhound Gang. They're from Westchester, and then you got like Bam Margera. Obviously, he's not in a band or anything, but he's like a very
he would have been,
interesting dude.
yeah, he would. I didn't know him personally. A lot of other people did. He had a band briefly. So yeah, no, all those people were around, and it was that. You're right. It was that kind of wisecracking skater kid sort of attitude in Eastern PA in a lot of cases.
So I really like this is going, and I usually structure it a very specific way, but I want to stick around like this for a minute. Did you guys find that there was any kind of rivalry between bands, or did you guys all just get along where that didn't exist?
I thought about this actually, and that we were really close with a lot of people. We knew Smilin' Jim before he had joined Weston. He had played with us a bunch of times at Scarlett's, which was just the worst place you could play, but it's where everybody started out. He had a band called Echoing Green, which was more of like a psychedelic kind of band that sounded honestly more like Strawberry Alarm Clock or the Hollies or something, and they were great, and we knew them and considered Jim a friend, but we never really got to know Weston all that well. We were really close with Walter Krug, the Overdrives. We were really good friends with them. One of my best friends from that era was Gil Resto, who was in Pen Pal and Nooner.
In Nooner, yeah.
And those guys all went to Kutztown too. They came a little later, but they were all there as well. I always wonder, you'd hear these things at a show or something, and I wonder how much was actually true and how much was whispered down the line and things misinterpreted. I don't really recall much of a rivalry between anybody. I mean, by the time we were gaining a little notoriety, Weston was well on their way. They had probably their first record out. It might have been right before Jim joined the band. So they were kind of already light years ahead of us. So we didn't see very much of them. It felt like a time in the Lehigh Valley where, okay, Weston, they've made it. So who's next to get out of town and do more than just play locally?
Yeah.
So we were all really eager to do that. And by all, I mean all of the bands on the scene.
Yeah, like once a band made it, it opened up the possibility to all the other bands like, oh, we can get out of here too, and we can get on a label and do this. But I think that's when it really kind of, I think, like brings out the true personality of people, right? So once it's just showing up at a show, Legion Halls, small clubs, whatever it was, playing, and it was fun and you're with your friends, but once I guess a quote unquote businessy thing comes into play, it shows your true colors on how much that might mean more and how that affects how you handle that. right? Like, does it make you think like you're a big shit, or do you just go, oh, this is just cool because we can actually get our records around the country and go tour, you know? So that was that defining moment where it showed bands they can get out of town, but then it also showed them what bands became kind of dicks, right? And then like which bands didn't.
Yeah,
And this isn't meant to be like a shit talking thing. It's just like my
no, no,
perception
no,
of
please.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that may have been the case in some extent. I mean, for me personally, I remember it feeling like, okay, well, this is kind of, it's not New York, it's not LA, it's not Chicago, it's, the Allentown, Bethlehem area. Weston could get on a label and play all over the country. And how about us? Like, are we next? What do we
Yeah.
have to do? We just want to get out of town and get on the road and explore the world and put records out. So if anything, I think a lot of us were probably just in a real hurry to grow up and didn't necessarily know what it all entailed or how it would all work. We were just eager to go and do the things.
I usually have a bunch of browser windows open in front of me where it's pictures of the band and then their Spotify page is open and just articles and things like that. So I have a bunch of stuff that I had opened up when I was trying to do the first couple times with you, and I was like, man, I can't find their songs anywhere. But then I really did some more searching and I found that you guys are on SoundCloud, so I've been listening to it, and you can hear there's a definite connecting thread of like when I listen to you guys, I hear a very Buddy Holly 50s sound kind of in there. And I also hear where you guys fit in with that Coolidge Records sound. And there was a band from Jersey. Did you guys ever play with True Zero or ever hear of them?
I've heard of them. We probably played with them, but I don't recall with certainty. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, when we had started out, I was 16. Mindy was in high school with me, and she was in my same grade, but I think she was a few months to a year older. Then Kevin had graduated, and I didn't meet him until after he graduated, and he was a few years older than me. So if I was 16, he might have been 21. The first year or so of the band, we were just really trying to figure it out. I mean, I hadn't been in a serious band before or anything. Kevin had. It wasn't probably until a year or so in until we kind of settled on being able to write material that fit that sound and we felt was who we wanted to be and what our voice was. So that was definitely a lot of Buddy Holly, a lot of obviously the classic punk bands and things to kind of the speed and the energy and the catharsis, but also we later discovered a lot of the new surf and garage bands that were coming out of the Pacific Northwest on
Yeah.
labels like Estrus. So we were all really into Manor Astroman and the Makers, New Bomb Turks, who were from Ohio. A lot of that kind of stuff where there was a retro element to it, but it was fast, it was still punk, but there was definitely nods to previous generations. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That was what we were after.
Yeah, it really stands out when you start listening to the songs. And since, I mean, like I said, I can find you on SoundCloud, which I'll link to in the show notes. And then there's a bunch of images online as well. And then there's an article from the Morning Call that was published June 17th, 1995, where they did an article on you guys. And so it's like, but it was before my point with all this was that I was like, this is cool because there's a lot about you guys that I just do not know. And I love the fact that this is going to be documented now. So I'm probably just going to ask you questions where like I want to have this really documented where people, these questions are answered. Like the simple ones, like this one is, how did you guys form? Like, how'd you guys meet? How'd you guys form?
Yeah, well, like I was saying, Mindy and I were in high school together, and we went to high school at Brandywine Heights, which was in Topton, or it is in Topton. It's still there. Topton is in between Allentown and Reading. The whole school had less than 600 kids in it at that time, so our graduating class only had 80 kids. Mindy and another girl that she was friends with were the only two punk rock people in the whole school. A lot of the kids worked on their parents' farms or, they're just kind of regular folks. I had been taking private lessons and learning how to play drums since maybe age 8. pre-internet and living in the woods in the middle of nowhere, the ability to even know what was going on in the music scene was nearly impossible. My parents would get the Village Voice and Rolling Stone. They had subscriptions to both. So I was reading about bands like Dinosaur Jr. or Husker Du and having no way to actually hear their music. And I just kind of had to imagine what these bands were, because I really, really detested what was going on at the time, which was a lot of the hair metal stuff.
Yeah.
I had no interest in Whitesnake and Poison and things like that. And that was really everything then, until grunge happened. And then I started playing in a little band with Mindy and a couple other kids from high school. And we played Unisound a couple times, but I mean, we barely had songs. We had no idea what we were doing. It was a lot of fun at the time, but I was, again, I was probably 16 years old. I had put one of those ads at a music store somewhere in Bethlehem. Kevin called me and found me through that, and then we got Mindy, and that was how that came together.
It's funny as you're saying this, just this little thing popped up in my head where I'm thinking, I think one of the reasons why this time period means so much to people is because we all really had to fucking work to find the music that we liked. Like you just said, it's like you had to, it wasn't just in your face where you could take a computer out of your pocket and find all of this stuff. Like we had to find out, well, somehow a song was presented to us by a mixtape or someone played it, and all of us
Exactly.
and we were like, what is that? Like you were like, what's Husker Du? And we didn't know what they looked like, which for me, I was always fascinated by that. There was a band I just interviewed that's going to come out before yours, and I had said to him, I was like, there's nothing out there really about you guys, and there's like maybe 2 photos online, but it created this mystery for me back then, because I was like, what do they look like? Like, when I saw them play the show. But I think that's why we're such huge fans of that time, and why it's embedded in us, because we had to put in just so much work. And I mean, yeah, it just makes a such stronger connection to it,
Yeah, I mean, Mindy and I remember we both kept a lot of lists of bands we were attempting to find a song from, because we had heard about them, we read about them in Maximum Rock and Roll or something like that. But even before that, Rolling Stone would interview a band like Living Colour, and then they would mention Black Flag in that interview, and I'd write that. Okay, well, I've got to find out what Black Flag is. Same thing, Nirvana, interviewed by Rolling Stone, they're talking about MDC, and got to write that down. Okay, so it was these things were all gateways to find other pieces of information. But at the end of the day, we spent so much time waiting for some midnight show to come on Muhlenberg radio station and call in and ask for bands, or hope that they would play things, and then tape the whole show, and that would be shared around the high school. That was it. That was the only method of finding out what this world was. It was not easy. So trips to record stores, if we went to Record Connection in Ephrata, or if we went to Play It Again in Bethlehem, a lot of it we'd go and look at just at the comps, and it was like, okay, we have $11 and we can buy one comp. Which one has the most bands we want to hear on it?
Yeah.
So it was so much about research, I guess, just trying to find this culture that was not able to be found by us.
Yeah, and that was the thing too, is that at that point in time, you're what, 16, 17? Well, you guys could drive at 16 in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
I remember that, and I was so fucking jealous. But you guys were able at that time, a year prior or a couple years prior to like people in Jersey or another, to go and like drive and go to these record stores at 16. So it's like you're super fucking bored. And then this is so exciting, and you're taking these trips, so it takes you however long to get there. Because if you're going, which town did you grow up in?
It was called Mertztown, which isn't even a town. I lived on what almost was a farm, as a lot of us did. We just lived in the woods in the middle of nowhere. So we were maybe 40 minutes from Allentown, 40 minutes from Reading, and in between, maybe there was a few suburbs like Trexlertown or something like that. But those were basically just strip malls. So the drive was part of the fun. A bunch of friends in the car. Hopefully your car had a tape player. Usually most did not, even back then. But if they did, that was great. I mean, I used to have a boom box that I would have tapes, and I would just sit it on the front seat with us. because I
Really?
just had a radio. Yeah, I mean, it was desperate times, I guess.
Holy shit, I've never heard that. I mean, I've never, because I grew up in a time where tape cassette players were, they were just baked into every car that I was in. Prior to that was the 8 tracks, right? I think, or they the 8 track players?
Yeah.
But you literally had a boombox in your passenger seat.
Yeah, no, I had a Buick, a 1980 Buick that had an 8-track tape player, but something was wrong with it, and it only played tapes at like Chipmunks speed. And it came with a
It's
Casey and the
amazing.
Sunshine Band 8-track, and at that speed, they sounded pretty phenomenal. They were like a death metal band. It was so that we'd listen to that for laughs, every once in a while, but it didn't get a lot of play.
So you named 2 record stores, and I'm sure that this is gonna be like a huge magnet for people who grow up in Eastern Pennsylvania. Like, I think you guys have been mentioned a bunch of times. I could swear in Chuck's interview he had mentioned you guys, I believe. Or
Yeah, I listened to
okay.
that. I think he mentioned us. Sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
Chuck
like
was working at Play It Again, and
oh.
that's probably how I knew him better than the other guys in Weston, is because you could just walk into the record store and chat with him. A lot of the other guys worked there too. At least a couple of the Walter Krug guys worked there, but it was just kind of understood that that was the place.
Jesse Short was in Walter Krug.
Yeah, Jessie and Arik worked there too.
Arik, was that his brother? Is that his brother?
No, his brother, I'm blanking on his name. His brother played drums. Arik was the bass player.
Yeah, because him and his brother have this like joke band out now, whatever. Have you got a chance
Oh,
to like,
really?
yeah, if you YouTube it, it's really funny. It's like kind of uncomfortable because they just get up there and just dance around like they're kind of like the Wiggles, but adult. It's
I
pretty
see.
funny. Yeah, it's like, but again, it just goes back to the personality that whole area had. It's just so funny. But like, so when you guys start playing, so you guys put the band together, and then at what age were you when like you came up and it was solidified as Grieving Eucalyptus?
We had the name probably within the first 2 months, and we were quickly playing any kind of show one could get back then. So that was mainly Unisound in Reading and Scarlet's in Bethlehem, and then occasionally the 4Gs in Bethlehem. Unisound was its own insane story on its own for so many bands, and now kind of looking back on everything that happened, at least in the punk scene, somewhat nationally throughout the 90s, Unisound is just representative of all the good and bad things. And so I guess what I mean by that is um, Unisound felt like what punk was before the internet happened, in that it wasn't commodified yet. It was still very clandestine. It was still just like skating at the same time. No one had an interest outside of the scene. Most people didn't even know it was happening. It was just this weird thing. It went beyond music. There was like a culture. A lot of that, at Unisound, there was like an element of the squatter culture, 2.5 Children guys, and others, where it wasn't just punk rock music. It was this whole lifestyle. The terrifying part of that was that area had a horrible skinhead problem. And, I was a little guy with kind of brown skin and, a funny sounding ethnic name. And, there was a lot of nights where you felt like you were taking your life into your hands going into these places. The owner of the club was completely overmatched and didn't really know what he was doing. The club was the second story of a building that should have been condemned. It had a half pipe in it. It had 2 stages, and they would have 2 nights every week. They were Friday and Saturday, I think it was. And one night would be the punk night. The other night would be the hardcore night. And he was, to his credit, getting bands in like Gorilla Biscuits and Shelter, Biohazard, and all these major, major bands who, at that point were maybe on their first record or first few 7 inches or something. But it was this balance of, okay, we can go and see these bands we read about in fanzines or we've heard about. We can open for them. We can play our own shows there. But we also have to be concerned that we borrowed our parents' car without their permission, and we come out to the parking lot and a skinhead's thrown a cinder block through the windshield.
Holy shit. Wow.
So, by the time I was done playing music in my late 20s, the band I was in had put out a number of records and toured all over the country. And I just kind of watched this scene change where by the end of it, it seemed like a lot of the young emo bands were looking for, it was almost like becoming like a Disney band or something. And that's fine if that was their path, and that's great. And they made some good music, but it just was so divorced from what my expectations were and from what I understood. I just felt kind of time out of joint.
Kind of cheated a little bit that you kind of lived in this real feeling error, and it just became, like you said, Disney. It's like when 42nd Street and all that became that. Well, granted, that was like hookers and stuff, which was bad, but
Well, more so that what I understood was the SST model of get in the van and go tour and put out 7 inches, and it just I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it had changed so much, yet was still called the same thing.
what year are you talking about? Because I'm thinking you're talking about the early 2000s, but you might be talking about the mid 90s.
Yeah, well, I was in a band called Sadaharu. My brother and I, and some other guys, friends of ours from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I had moved to after college. And we started around 2001, and we put out maybe 4 full lengths. And, we were doing things that bands did at that time, like getting on package tours and, label showcases and playing South by Southwest and all these sorts of things. And it is comparable, I guess, in a way to skateboarding, in that we all went from being skater kids who were going to get beat up by jocks to it being this, thing where someone like Tony Hawk is as recognizable as Michael Jordan,
Yeah.
So just the perception around this whole thing changed so drastically in the few years I was part of it. Just my takeaway was how very different it was. And to a good point, I mean, the skinheads largely went away. So a lot of kids younger than me didn't have to live in fear or get harmed or anything like that. I mean, Airport Music Hall, which I always avoided in Allentown, would have these horrible, horrible skinhead riots and things. Like, kids would go see the Bad Brains, and the skinheads were waiting for them outside. Ice-T had the band Body Count.
Yeah, Kill the Cop
They had
Killer.
played.
Yeah.
So they had played at the Airport Music Hall, and the skinheads were so bad they had to cancel the show. And for years, you'd see Ice-T saying in interviews how much he hated Allentown. You knew if you knew he meant these skinheads were basically, I forget the whole story, but they had to get out of there and end the show early, and he was rightfully really upset. But that was the attitude. My friends had a band called No One's Hero. They played there with the Exploited, and they said you couldn't hear the bands over the marching and the yelling of these skinhead groups. So it was a really scary time for a lot of people.
It's as you're talking about this, Ray Campo did an interview on Joe Rogan over the summer, or yeah, I think it was during all this, and he talks about how Shelter played a show. I don't know if this is where it was, but when you said Shelter in that club, what was the name of that club again? Sound what?
Unisound.
Unisound. I don't know if this is where it was, but he talks about how Shelter played this show, and they showed up, and these guys just showed up and beat the living shit out of people outside, where they almost beat him to death, it sounded like Ray Capo. His band members like got in their van and drove off. This is when they were at Shelter, all Hare Krishnas, and they take off, and this guy comes up to him or something. He's like, tonight's the night you're going to die. And he tells a story where even these girls come in with bats and start beating him. And I don't think this is the place, but like, to me, I was like, I wonder if that's where that fucking happened. Because the story is brutal. And he's like telling to Joe Rogan. I was like, this is fucking insane. But I was like, I wonder if that's the place. But it sounds like that's like a place where the shit was going down.
One of several, yeah, in Reading and Allentown. And actually, a few years later, well into our band, Jessie from the Overdrives put on a show at the Tatamy Fire Hall. And it was us and the Overdrives and Walter Krug and Digger and probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 other bands. And the skinheads had showed up, and sometimes the skinheads would show up and they'd just irritate you. They'd just yell or be stupid or whatever. And they're just bullies. They're just stupid bullies who, attempt to get entertainment through violence and bullying people. So a lot of times you could sort of dismiss them. And by this point, I might have been 19, 20 years old. So it wasn't as terrifying as it was when I was a lot younger and they were a lot more violent. But that night they kept just antagonizing everyone to the point that I think Digger probably left. They might not have even played. And we were playing last. Jessie from the Overdrives got on stage and was kind of attempting to cool everybody out, and it didn't work. And we went on, and by the second or third song, they just started wailing on everybody. They just flipped out and started just beating everybody. And I don't know what happened. Like, I'm not a fighter. I just snapped, and I ran into the crowd, and I just started screaming at them. I kind of realized Mindy and Kevin were on stage yelling at the Skinheads. They were just as angry as me, but I think in that moment they were trying to either reel me back on stage so I didn't get stomped, or try to draw the attention away from me or something like that. But if there is a funny part to this story, the next night I was still living with my mom, and we had the local news on, and all of a sudden they play some video of this show. There's our band, there's all the kids, there's all the other bands, and there are Skinheads, and it's slow motion video of like fists hitting faces. My mom, all the blood drained out of her face, and she says, "Is this what goes on at these shows?" It was, I had never been busted so hard, you know.
Holy shit. What did this like make you not want to fucking play shows?
It just made me really, really angry. Again, you know, I have an ethnic name. I definitely had a darker complexion growing up in the Mertztown, Topton area. There weren't people of other ethnicities, and these people weren't, you know, if they had seen someone of another culture, it would have been on the Cosby Show or something. I mean, they didn't have the opportunity to meet people outside of their own group. So I had been the subject of a lot of stupid middle school, grade school racial abuse and things like that. So it was just like, I got into punk to get away from the bullies, and the bullies followed us here. And it's the same old. It was, it just kind of emboldened us all more that, no, this is our scene. Yes, we get it. The no rules culture of punk gives you all a back door to come in and act this way, but we are not tolerant of you, and we are not going to accept you doing what you're doing, ruining these shows, ruining our spaces to play, terrorizing people. It's not acceptable.
Well, I mean, the funny thing here is that your sound, Weston sound, Digger, Overdrives, it wasn't an aggressive sound. It was fun, inviting, like poppy. And so for you guys to show up and play these shows and have this complete opposite element roll in, that just seems so, what's the word? I mean, opposite, obviously, but it doesn't make any sense. But I guess it makes sense
No,
because
I hear
that's just
you,
what the
but
crowd was there.
at the end of the day, though, the Skinheads, they're bullies, so they're
Yeah.
cowards.
So it's almost like
that
it was like a
means,
magnet for them. They're like, oh, we're gonna show up and beat these fucking dorks up or whatever, you know?
yeah, I mean, we appear weaker than them.
Right.
But also, you have to remember, all of our bands were playing at a punk speed. So even if there was a pop element to it, this was a time where, I mean, what was it, Woodstock 94? Kids were moshing to Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
that's
someone
right.
tuning up their guitar could start a pit.
Yeah.
It was this new thing, and a lot of people got sucked into it and didn't understand what they were doing, or again, saw it as an invitation for violence, a venue for it, and they went with that, whether or not it was warranted or accepted or anything else.
Did you find that the scene kids somehow, because I was in a band called Lanemeyer, and we would
Yes.
play down in Allentown and in Westchester and in that area, but I don't remember ever feeling fearful when we went down there, and we were going down there in about 98, 99, 2000, so we never
It was
felt that.
really, really over by then in a lot of cases, and by then you'd only see those guys show up at big shows. For instance, the Misfits got back together and they came through Allentown, and there was some big fight there. And Frank Pern, Frank Foe, the Foe fanzine and record label, he was writing for the Morning Call, the newspaper of Allentown, and wrote this whole big article on what this was and why it was happening and what was wrong with it. And it was really very eloquent at the time, but it was so jarring to see something like that, speaking about those things from one of our own. in a paper that, everyone in Allentown would get, 90-year-old people and everyone else, just regular folks. But you're right, that a lot of that, the violence really was tapering off and it was just popping up randomly. Like that Tathamy show, that the Overdrives book that I was telling the story about, that might have been 95 or 96. So these things were lessening. Luckily, these guys were becoming of adult age and probably had to go get jobs and stop messing around, or a lot of them maybe went to jail or whatever the case is. So it petered out.
What year did you guys form like fully as a band and start playing local shows?
92, I think. It was the summer of 92. Yeah, I remember, putting that ad out, and then maybe a day later, Kevin calling me, and, just coincidentally, he lived, I don't know, 3-4 miles up the road from us.
Oh, wow.
Mindy lived just down the street from me. I could ride a bike to her house. Yeah, my dad had a woodworking shop on the premises where my home was, and we were just, practicing in there, just the two of us for a few days. That was, I would have been turning 16, maybe. But yeah, summer of 92.
So when you guys started playing, and obviously you just painted this whole picture of what the scene was like in these certain areas and stuff, but how are you guys because again, your name has come up where when bands are talking about other bands and when they bring them up because they remember them, they liked them, they put them up. I wouldn't say put on a pedestal, but they were inspired by them, right? They were one of their bands that they were like, oh man, like this band. So like when you guys started, how did the scene welcome you, and how were you perceived in the scene?
Again, we were a good bit away from really finding the sound that we had on the records that we released later on. We were finding our way like so many other young bands. I mean, I had been taking drum lessons privately since I was 8 and playing in school band, but I didn't understand yet how to play drums in a band and have a song structure and understanding chord changes and things like that. So even with all whatever lessons I was getting, I sat in my room and I had a box set of all the early Rolling Stones singles, all the ABCO singles. And it wasn't until I just said, like, okay, you're going to figure this out. And I sat there and listened to it and sat behind my drum kit and kind of listened to it and played and listened to it and played and thought, okay, these are simple enough that I can figure out the system. So I figured, okay, verse goes here and chorus goes there, and here's how you change with the vocals. And, so we were doing everything we could to, but Kevin, again, was far more advanced than we were, Mindy and I. But when we were playing on those early shows, if it was Unisound, it was usually a lot of other young punk bands. There's a band called the Abreacts, which were good friends with Plow, that had like a real political punk sort of Bad Religion sort of sound. There was a ton of others. And then Allentown was really weird. Actually, there was a band called Shaggy's Belt Buckle.
Okay.
And that was Phil from Digger. And it was Tim Heidecker of Tim and Arik.
Tim and Arik, I don't know that.
The comedy group, they're the duo, they're on Adult Swim, and he's been in a bunch of movies and stuff. He was on Curb Your Enthusiasm, but he's become this big actor. But he was just another teenage kid in a band in Allentown.
That's wild. So I have your Discogs page open, by the way, and for some reason your name is crossed out on it. It says members, and your name has a line through it. Do you know why?
No, I have Discogs just to kind of track my record collection, but I don't really know a lot of how that site works, so I don't know why my name would be crossed out.
Yeah, I didn't even know. Someone mentioned to me the other day that you can actually buy stuff from this site, and I just use it as like another form of Wikipedia to have information up. But the site's so weird.
My little brother has a record store, and I think he's on there as well as a bunch of other sites. So yeah, he sells through there.
Oh, also people listening, you can buy stuff through Discogs. But it's got your first cassette demo is Left Cheek Sneak, and then you got Just Plain Rock and Roll. So, and then it goes into Super Duper Drivin'. Which of those albums is where I'm guessing it's Just Plain Rock and Roll is where you start finding your sound?
Well, that was the full length. So by that point, we had written a group of songs that we believed in, and Frank Foe wanted to put the record out, which which was great. So he put that on CD and vinyl, and we toured on it, and we toured as much as we could. But before that, we started playing. Lehigh University had a space run by this great guy named Chris Newmeyer, who also started a little record label called Self Starter Records. And he was releasing more like math rock bands and things like Karate and a lot of the early kind of emo, but not emo bands you would hear, like
Captain Jazz kind of style.
I know yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Karate's the only one I remember. But he put us on a bunch of shows and put out a 7-inch of ours. And also right around that time, he put us on a show opening for 7 Seconds. And I was in my freshman year of college. So I guess I was 18. And the lineup was, the first band was a joke band that Moby had.
Okay.
And he borrowed my drum kit. And I remember being terrified, like, I really loved Kevin Seconds and 7 Seconds, and we all did. And we were so excited. It was the biggest show we ever played. It was like, I'm so worried this guy is going to destroy my drum kit before I even get to play.
Yeah.
But he didn't, and life went well. Immediately after the show, Kevin Seconds takes us aside, and he and the band took us on to, they had a tour bus. They had a tour bus at this point. So, I'm 18 and I'm like, okay, I just opened up for this band whose records we own, and I'm on the tour bus with them. And then he goes, okay, we played a lot of bands throughout the tour, and you were one of my favorites, and I have a label, and we want to do a 7-inch. And it was like just the most insane thing. It blew my mind. So I remember the next day on campus running around to kids I didn't even know and be like, 7 Seconds, I put on my lid, and just, they're probably like, I don't know who you are or anything that you're saying, but it was like 10 Christmases, all that sort of happened.
Which label was that, though? Was that Abysmal?
That was called Pacifist, so that would have been the Super Duper.
Yeah, Super
7-inch.
Duper. Wow, that's crazy. I mean, think about it, right? All you wanted to do was play a show with that band, like one of your favorite bands, and then that's where it ended, right? It was like, that's all I wanted, and then all of a sudden, hey, do you guys want to come on our tour bus? You're like, I wasn't expecting that. And then it's like, I really liked your band. You're like, I wasn't expecting you to say that. And it's like, we want to put you on it. And you're like, I'm dead. Kill me.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I mean, at that age, I was still really, really naive and sheltered. In my mind, if we went to play CBGB's, which I don't think we did. I played there with other groups later on. But if we did, my brain would have thought, oh, well, the Ramones will be there and we'll hang out with the Ramones. And of course not, you moron. It's not going to happen. You're playing a Tuesday night Battle of Bands with 50 other bands. You're playing for gas money if you're lucky, and no one cares. But it was like this weird fantasy came out of my head, and it actually happened for us. So that was a big, big moment. But that 7-inch, we still were finding our way. Those songs weren't ones that I think we included on the full length. They were just before we started really finding our sound, I guess it was.
What was that experience for that record then, right? Because by that point, so I'm just going according to Discogs here. So Just Plain Rock and Roll comes out in 96, and then that year you also did the Overdrives, which I want to talk about. But prior to this, you put out your demo, and then you had Drive-In and then Super Duper. So it sounds like Super Duper came before Drive-In, right?
Yeah, I think there was a delay in the release, more due to his label was owned or distributed by Cargo Records, which was a big, they were a big indie label in that era. They had like Rocket from the Crypt and
First Blink album was on that with like Grilled Cheese Records and all that.
Oh, right. Exactly. So something held that up. So the material was for us a lot older, but came out maybe within a couple months of the Johnny Made Me Do It 7-inch, which Chris Newmeyer released on Self Starter. And then I think the songs from that 7-inch did go on the album. But what it did was, back then, you just wanted to have a merch table with stuff.
Yeah.
And especially playing Western PA, which was the greatest, most fun places to play on the planet. Kids were, if I lived in the middle of nowhere, these kids lived in the super middle of nowhere. They had no anything. So a lot of the Lehigh Valley bands could come through and play these hall shows. And these kids were so wonderful and so starved for anything. They had, if they mowed lawns or delivered papers, they had all this cash and they would just buy everything on everybody's merch table and freak out the whole time. And it was probably the most excited of an audience one could ever play for. So that was places like Warren and Oil City and St. Mary's and Conneaut Lake. And a lot of that was due to Greg Ox. He had a band called Ox, and he had a zine called Chumpire. And he had moved out there. Conneaut Lake was right maybe south of Erie, PA, and he was like a middle school Spanish teacher. And he also started putting on shows and building a scene and explaining to kids, okay, here's what we do. We bring in these bands and we pay them a living wage, and you support them, and you don't ask for a discount out the door. You pay the $5. He was just this really, really gracious, smart, wonderful person who was able to corral all these kids who had nothing but energy and, nowhere to go with it. And he gave them something. He's a great guy, and he's still around. He's in, I think, the Hershey area now. He came to my little brother's wedding. He's one of the first people I met playing music, and he's still in our lives, which is great.
I love that. I love that people, they're not told to do this. No one's asking for it. They're just like, I think I'm just gonna. I have a vision about something I want to build, and I'm just gonna authentically start something. And then, how many decades later, people, you're still thinking, you still know that, and you become friends with this person, right? They just
absolutely
genuinely show up to make something happen. And
yeah, that's exactly right.
I love that. I mean, like, I've been an entrepreneur working for myself for, Jesus Christ, 14, 16 years or something like that. And it sounds like
oh wow,
you as well, right? With what you do, are you working for a company or are you working for yourself?
I work for a company.
Okay. Also, real funny, and you have Doyle.com, which I thought was hilarious. When I was like, oh, he has my last name's domain.
Right. Yeah. Coincidentally, the company I work for is called Doyle. Yeah.
I was like, that's amazing. But it's like, I don't know. I just appreciate that. I mean, that's how things get built. It's just someone has an idea, and they just put a lot of energy into it, and it causes this positive thing, hopefully. And like this guy doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the history of DIY culture, and you can take that, at least if you want to stay just within punk, you could take that to, Tom Verlaine and other musicians building what was CBGB's. They did that. That's DIY, but it's also born of necessity. Nobody cares. The industry doesn't care. You're not going to get on a big label. And going back that far, there wasn't even kind of the college rock thing where you could get a left of center band noticed. Either you figured out a way to do it yourself or it didn't happen. And that going forward, into the 90s and was still the case. A band that I admired a lot at the drive-in was behaving like that, touring in that way, even later into their career. That was what we all grew up with, this sense of just, suck it up and deal with it. Book your shows, book a tour, survive, know a little bit about auto mechanics. If your van breaks down, all the things, figure out how to get a t-shirt printed. It's all part of that. Just knowing that the larger industry doesn't know and doesn't care. So you've got to find your own way.
Well, it's funny because I work for myself now. Like, I've had my own animation company as an LLC for like 10 years. And I still have to do this. So every week I get up and I go, there's nothing being handed to me. So I still live 100% DIY. But it's in a whole different medium. It's in marketing and creating content. But I try to take these ideals that we grew up with, and it's almost fun to me. Where when I talked to Chris from Less Than Jake, he was telling me about how they grew that band. So I ended up, and he does consultation calls. So I asked him, I was like, hey man, like, what do you charge to do this? And it was like really inexpensive. So I hired him for an hour just to pick his brain and say, look, like, I live in a digital medium. How can I take this offline and do stuff like we used to do, where I can incorporate flyers somehow or stickers? And would that even do anything? So it's still like, you can still do it that way now, but you can also bring that online and have this, I got to do it myself. So how can I creatively grow something so I can just do this on my own? And it's like, it's still fun, to do that. I don't really know where I was going with that, but it just kind of just triggered in me that it's still possible. So it's like in that time period, that's all we had was a physical medium. There was really no digital medium. But now that there is digital, like you could still do that and have that scrappiness, but people just forget about that now.
Yeah, I mean, I took the opportunity to go to college. I saw it beyond just going to classes. And at the time, it was like, okay, I'm in this band and this is what I want to do. And I need to figure this out. So I'll join the radio station. I will make zines. I will book shows on campus. Um, Obviously, I have the band that I'm in. And then I'll work at the record store, which was Young Ones, which is a great record store that still exists in
Oh, wow.
Kutztown.
Really?
And yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
still same owner and great record store. It's moved a few times within Kutztown, but it's still right in the downtown area. And I worked there for a number of years. So I just immersed myself as much as I could in all of it. And not only to learn, but, to meet people. And if I was ordering records from Mortem Distribution or Hopeless or whatever, I'm talking to those people who are in a DIY culture and they're finding their own way as well. But they obviously have more of an infrastructure than I did in my teen years. So picking their brains but doing so in a way like you're explaining, you're paying them for their time and what they do, but you're being part of their community and playing a symbiotic role.
Yeah, I mean, like even then, like even now I have to have this balance where it has to be authentic, but there is a strategy to it, right? Where I have to move forward, but it's got to be without a bullshit way. So it sounds like you wanting to grow your band, you'd made these decisions where it was, like you said, working at the record store where it was authentic because you love music, but it sounds like a little bit of a strategy was put in there. Well, it's like, well, if I do this, and this is a guess, I could be wrong, but it sounds like, oh, and shit, I can make connections and learn how we can turn out what we're doing into something. Is that correct?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, college was a time where I had the opportunity to do nothing but learn. It was good to have a job and have some other cash, especially when we started really playing a lot and touring, that I could have cash on hand just to, survive on the road and everything. But really, how much was some random college course on history really going to influence and enrich my life?
Yeah.
And how much of it was filling a credit? Meanwhile, I was doing these things that I found much more necessary to my life, which was learning how to book a show and doing it for a college. So I'm kind of playing with house money, I guess. The same thing with the radio station. Like I didn't know how to be a record DJ or anything like that. And then, okay, well now you're doing it, so figure it out. So those opportunities, I was lucky to have them, and I learned a lot. I was glad I did them.
Did you find that being on Pacifist Records, it worked out the way you wanted it to?
I mean, we had the 7-inch. It came out. We were excited to have it at our shows. We were really proud of it. We got, probably some write-ups in Maximum Rock and Roll, and I don't think Punk Planet existed yet, but maybe some other larger fanzines. So all of that was to the good. I don't know that we had any idea of what to expect from anything, really. We were just kind of doing what we knew how to do, which was just, the answer was always play more shows and keep writing and do all those things. But we were really happy to have someone from a band that we really admire just support us and kind of acknowledge that we had a reason to exist. Oddly, this is a weird story, but a couple years earlier, when our demo tape came out, I had sent it out to some random bands that we all liked at the time, and one of them was Superchunk. And I got a letter back, and it was obviously one of the guys from Superchunk, and he wrote this thing that I don't know if he was in a bad mood or if we all read it wrong, but it was basically like, hey, kind of don't bother.
Wow.
And again, I want to be fair to this person. They might have just not articulated things well.
You're saying your perspective, which is just your perspective. It's really
sure. It was something. It might have been that he was having a rough time. That Superchunk they were not, Motley Crue or something. They weren't millionaires. I'm sure they still aren't. But it was. So he might have been struggling with something and just in a lousy mood and said, "Hey kid, don't end up like me," and whatever. So, but my 17-year-old brain went like, what? You know, how dare
Yeah.
you? You can dislike the music or whatever, but don't steal my joy from me, you know? Superchunk ended up playing a couple months later, I believe, and we took the letter. And we confronted him after the show. We weren't mean. We're just like, dude, you know, we really admired your band, and we're just kids trying to have fun and play music, and we wanted to share it with you. And we just feel this is kind of lousy. And he was, first of all, you know, really, really stunned and kind of shocked that he got confronted as anyone would in a situation like that. And to his credit, he was very genuine. And I think he understood that he kind of hurt these kids' feelings. But to go from, you know, 7 seconds saying, you know, not only do we like you, but we're going to put our time and money behind you.
And that happened after, though. The 7 seconds happened after that whole thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. I mean, but at the same time, it's like, I think sometimes in life, at the moment where it happens, you just cannot. You're going to take it how you're going to take it. I've tried to take that now, even now, like if I'm rejected in any way, it's super hurtful, but you have to have a different perspective where you're like, what can I take from this or do this? Like, did you and do with it? So did you find that kind of gave you a little bit more fire that you needed to just be like, you know what? We're going to keep fucking doing this, and we're going to make it work.
Yeah, that was never even an option. I think for the three of us, again, naivety plays a role, but we lived in the middle of nowhere, and all our friends were graduating and going to work on their parents' farms or going to work at the local battery factory, all of which are wonderful and noble things, but it wasn't for us. We just wanted to get out. We wanted to get out of that kind of nowhere town and go and explore the world, and we were not going to be stopped. We went on and did have a lot of those adventures, but that's that DIY thing. No one was going to give it to us. No one gave it to Weston or any of the other bands from our area.
No.
If the Overdrives wanted to put a record out, they put out a 7-inch. They did what they could do to promote themselves and their scene and grow as a band and play shows. And that's the only way it's going to happen.
So when Pacifist, when you were done with that 7-inch, was there ever conversation after that, or was like, hey guys, thanks for that, and they're like, no problem, have fun doing your thing, you're like, cool, or did you try to say, hey, all right, cool, what's the next step?
Yeah, we were always really sensitive to what someone who was at the level of a really important hardcore punk band like 7 Seconds, what his time was worth. So I think that we were not wanting to be one more person nagging him. He was obviously putting out records for other bands. Actually, at the same time that 7-inch came out, the other 7-inch he released was a band called Far.
Oh,
and
wow.
Far ended up getting picked up by like Sony, and Jonah, who went on from that band to One Line Drawing. He was, you know, Kevin Seconds, in addition to his own band and all the things that were needed, he was doing all these other things. So really for us, I think we ran into him a few times here and there. He had a side project band called 510 that we played with. Yeah, really once that record came out, there wasn't much of a relationship after that. But hey, you know, we were already overjoyed to get what we got. So
I wonder if, like, on his perspective, right? Because that there is that thing where you just said, well, we didn't really want to be a nuisance or a bother. I wonder if that works against people who are in that position like him, when people are thinking that, and he's just like, I really wish you guys would have said something because I really wanted to do more releases, and you're thinking, well, shit, we just thought it was this, and he's like, no, it really is not like that. I actually really wanted to do another record. Or, you know, it's like you kind of think, like, who knows what direction it is. You could be all just thinking that, but I wonder if it works against people like that.
yeah, I think, you know, we were figuring things out as we went, like so many other of the young bands. We were just doing what was in front of us. So yeah, maybe. I don't know. He had a lot of things going on. The label might not have even existed much longer. He might have had other labels after that. He was someone who had a lot of projects. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, sure, there's probably an element of squeaky wheel gets the grease, but at the same time, being respectful of people's time and boundaries it was and is important.
How many tours did you go on? And, like, over how many years?
Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it depends what you define a tour. We did a lot
I
of,
would say a
you
tour
know,
would
4-day
equal,
stints.
yeah, like it would equal leaving I, it could be two ways. It could be one, like you said, going out for 4 days where you sleep overnight somewhere and you're far enough from home, or be like leaving the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would say, maybe a handful. We did a tour. I think it was the tour right after our full length came out. Gil Resto from
Nooner.
Nooner introduced us to a band from California that he was friends with called Driver 11. And
Yeah, I remember that.
those guys ended up for a moment making a band with Phil from Digger after he left Digger and playing a handful of shows and then breaking up. But the drummer, he might have played like session drums for Smashing Pumpkins when their drummer left briefly. Like he was a successful studio drummer who was very, very good, obviously, to be able to play with bands at that level. But they were out of like Modesto, California, maybe, or Merced. And we did a tour with them for maybe about 2 weeks. That was probably the longest tour that I can recall, but it seemed like we were always out playing somewhere. But the farthest west we made it was Green Bay, Wisconsin. Green Bay had a great scene for bands like us, and we played out there. We had 2 nights. One was Halloween night, and the other was either the night before, the night after. And we played Halloween night at the club in Green Bay, and that was us and the Nobodies and Boris the Sprinkler.
Yeah.
So that was really huge. Boris the Sprinkler was the local Green Bay band, and Norb was writing for Maximum Rock and Roll, and that was packed and awesome. It was a great club, and they were all very inviting and kind of instantly good rapport with all those guys. We went on to play with them a good bit, and they were kind of very supportive of us, brought us through Green Bay a number of times. And then the next night was Fireside Bowl in Chicago, and it was the same bill plus Pansy Division. So again, just,
Damn.
tons of kids, lots of fun. Everybody had a great attitude. Those were some really fun days, but that was about as far west as we made it, which for us, hey, we were overjoyed to get that far.
Real quick, Boris the Sprinkler, were they on Go-Kart? Was that the label they were on? Do you remember this at all? It's so
I think
obscure.
so. Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds right.
Because it kind of makes that when you said that, I thought about that's how we found out about Weston was we saw them play with Face to Face and they were on Go-Kart and that's when Got Beat Up was on. Where it seemed like, well, not it seemed like this is guys. Did you guys try to get on Go-Kart at all?
I think we probably sent records to everybody. I mean, we were always looking for labels, but Frank was very, very good with what he did. I mean, he had his fanzine. He was putting out a number of records, pretty much just of Lehigh Valley bands. But, talking about the DIY scene, that was Frank's attitude as well, is we would all look at Maximum Rock and Roll and they had scene reports. And it seemed like the idea was, okay, you're in Augusta, Georgia, or you're in St. Louis, or wherever you may be, and you have your scene and you kind of send in to Maximum Rock and Roll what's going on, like who the local bands are that people should know about outside of their hometown. I think Frank thought he had an obligation to be someone like Ian Mackay of Discord to document his local scene. And that's what he was doing. And he did a good job of it. So he was good to us. Our records were out there. We had plenty to tour on. We could help him distro them to record stores or whatever the case may be. So we just did what we could do.
Did you guys ever sit down and start defining where your sound was going, or did it just kind of just naturally happen where you showed up where you showed up?
It's hard to remember exactly. It's been so long since.
I know it's so hard to ask these questions where I'm thinking it's like yesterday, but this is like 25 fucking years ago. But you never know.
Yeah. Kevin grew up with a lot of Beatles music in his home. His mom was a huge Beatles fan. I'm sure she still is. So he came already knowing a lot of early rock and roll music, Sun Records and things like that, in addition to the Beatles. I had grown up with a lot of Motown and R&B in my house. My parents had every Motown record and James Brown and all those things. And Mindy was very, very much, before punk, she was really into early Pink Floyd, the Beach Boys. Really, I think it came just to us getting the chops to be able to kind of imitate that sort of music. And the more we listened to it, the more we made tapes for each other, the more we played records for each other, the more we learned and figured out. And we'd get obsessed with certain kind of bands from the past. For a number of years, I was really obsessed with a band called the Zombies. I'm sure all these things influenced our sound a lot. So it grew out of that and out of us just being better at being a band, being better at our instruments and not just hearing the sound, but knowing how to replicate that.
How are you guys as a band? Like, how'd you guys get along internally?
Like any band, I think there were times where we were really close. There was times where we didn't get along at all. We all hung out a lot together in Kutztown when I was going to school there. Yeah, we obviously toured together, and that's its own thing. That can be
Yeah.
great days and tough days depending on everyone's mood and life and situation. You're in each other's faces 24 hours a day for weeks at a time, so there's good and bad to it. But yeah, we were good.
I just did this interview with James from Slow Gherkin, and it dawned on me in the interview where I never thought about ska bands, where like you guys and my band, we were a four-piece, you guys are a three-piece, and it's usually, and you'd probably bring a roadie or someone to do merch
Right.
with you, so it's a small crew, and
Yeah.
that's hard.
Whereas
Where
they've
ska
got a
band,
horn section. Yeah.
I was like, how many guys at the band at one time? He's like, we had like 9. And I'm thinking, you have 9 people crammed in a van with a merch person or a stout, like whoever else is in that, and you're in that space for that long. I was like, how was that? He's like, oh yeah, that shit got real. And but just that, I like how you said that, like people are there with their own shit, and all you have is time between the moment you leave in the morning to drive however far to get there and just wait for this goddamn show to start. And
Hmm.
it's exciting. In the beginning, it was really exciting. I remember this. I was like, this is the coolest thing of my life. And then there's a part where burnout comes in. So yeah, like that does show up where it's you have to sit there and be. Some bands just get along great the whole time. Like I listen to a lot of like Brendan talk about the Lawrence Arms and stuff, and those guys. I'm sure they have moments, but I remember being on tour with them, and they were just making each other laugh the whole time, and we're like just not getting along. So I don't know, just like I just flashed back to that. But yeah, you're bringing your shit to the van and sitting in that small space for however long. It's such a huge test to the longevity of a band.
It's a disorienting way for anyone to live.
Yeah.
The space, the time, and the lack of natural supplies. I mean, I remember days wondering, okay, well, we've got to come up with some food, and or okay, we're in Milwaukee and our radiator exploded, and
Yeah.
we need $400, and where's that going to go? So add that on to everything else, and yeah, that'll crack the best of friends.
Did any of you, the three of you, have a vision of going further and then where someone else had a vision of not following that path?
I don't know. I mean, we just wanted to do what the next thing was, whatever that next thing may be. But things were limited for us, so we really took the DIY spirit to heart and attempted just to do as much as we could with whatever skills the three of us had. And we were always really appreciative when other people kind of stepped in and gave us a hand, if that was Kevin Seconds or Chris Newmeyer or Frank Foe or Frank Phobia in Reading, who booked a ton of shows out there and had a label, and all these people that you'd find throughout the country going on tour who did what they could to be a part of it. But I don't know that there was a grand plan or anything, or that we would know how to execute it. I mean, this is years before Blink-182 and the internet, obviously, and these things being more marginalized. So I don't know that any of us had all that many expectations of getting to the sort of level of bands that we saw on MTV. Green Day, I think, was the first time a lot of us saw that. Was, okay, here's a band that went from a label that we know, and they played basements like we played, and now they're on Saturday Night Live. That gave us all hope, and it showed us that it was possible, but it didn't necessarily explain how. The how was on us.
That's a good point, because all I had in front of me was Warped Tour, and that showed me a local giant concert, right, where all the bands on there lived in this bubble that we were listening to. And that became like, to use this term, uh, just to use it, it's like the North Star for me, where I would be in the crowd. I was always the kid in the crowd who looked at the band on the stage and said, I want to be there. I don't want to be here. I want to be them. And going to Warped Tour, you had hundreds of bands doing that where that was in front of my face that made it like, oh, this could happen. And so that was my viewpoint, but yours was, okay, well, we got Green Day and The Offspring and then like Weezer, which was like could fit in the punk thing, but they were just their own thing. So you're seeing that, but it wasn't so much where like connecting the dots on how you could get to there because that seems so gigantic.
Yeah, I think we were definitely more bite-sized
Yeah.
about a lot of that, in that we would play locally at the Catasauqua Hall quite a bit, and the person booking shows there would bring in a lot of touring bands as well. So we played there a few times with the Dismemberment Plan, who are a really great band. I don't know if we played the show where Wesley Willis and the Wesley Willis Fiasco played. I was definitely there. It was one of the best live shows I ever saw. But when all these bands would come through from wherever, I would do everything I could to just kind of chat with them and put them up at my house if I could, or kind of be part of a scene that did what we had hoped for when we would go to other people's towns. So there was a restaurant in Allentown, an old diner that made Philly cheesesteak omelets. And, anytime a band came through town that I was friends with or was growing to know as friends, that's a place we'd go together. Those are the kind of things when I was on tour that I was hoping for when we go into a town. Like, what's the local color and who are the fun people that are going to show us the great things about this town and this community.
Couple questions before I ask about how you guys broke up. How did the whole split with the Overdrives come about?
I have so little recollection of that. That was Kevin and Jessie.
Okay.
That was Kevin and Jessie, and that just appeared one day. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton more to it than that, but we might have played with them more than anyone else in the Lehigh Valley. Them, Plow, and probably Walter Krug. I think just sheer volume of shows we played together are probably the most. They were good friends of ours, and Jessie put that out on his own. So yeah, that's about all I recall about that.
Josh is gonna love knowing that or hearing that.
Do you still talk to him?
Yeah, Josh listens, I think, like every one of these episodes. Like
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we connected for his interview, and it was because he had, I forget how he emailed me, and we started just talking. So we got on the phone and talked, and I was like, we talked for 2 hours, and I was like, I really wish I could have recorded this because we ended up going back and recording it, but he was just telling me all these stories and just talking about that time period. So he loves that time period so much. So I bet he's gonna text me during this one.
They had a lot of fans. They were in the Lehigh Valley, at least. I'm not sure about outside. I'm sure they did a lot of what we did and just toured and played. But I remember one night we had a good friend who I went to Kutztown with, Big Dave, and Big Dave came with us and was kind of a roadie for us. And then after he left Kutztown, he went back home and he lived on a farm somewhere in I think Bedford, PA, and he had a space where bands like ours would play, and he'd have bands like the Nobodies and the Go to Hells and a lot of those bands. Big Dave really loved a lot of the garage punk bands that we did, but one night we got there and he said, okay, it's import night, meaning the beer selection was things that weren't Iron City. That was the import.
What's Iron City?
Iron City beer from Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So the imports could have been Budweiser.
Yeah.
It's
we got Coors Light tonight.
I expected that to be funnier, but one needs to know what Iron City is. To make
I like just totally killed that. I'm like, wait, what's that? That sounds like that beer that's big in Chicago. Shit. Anyone from Chicago listening is be yelling this right now. My friend Amber Payne's probably yelling it. It's, oh my God. It's like, it looks like Pabst Blue Ribbon, but it's their local beer. And whatever, but that's like, it's local to them, so it's huge to them. It's almost like here, I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's a beer here called Hams. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes. Of course.
Is that a North Carolina? I've never heard of it until I moved here, but it's like $3. So people they'll have that, and then they'll also get like the $7 hazy IPA where it's just the two are so off balance, but they're like, oh, I'm gonna fucking
Right.
crush a hams. They're like, oh, okay, I'll try that. But it's I don't know. I thought it was local to here. All right, so a couple questions to wrap this up. But
Hmm.
so how did you guys? What year did you guys break up, and why?
I want to say 96 or 97. And I was asking my younger brother actually to help me kind of remember some things. He has a way better memory than I do. And he thinks that your band played with us on the last show we played together, which
Really?
would have been, he thought so.
That's crazy.
And that would have been at the Brickyard in Allentown.
Wait, the Brickyard. Oh, I'm thinking of the Ice House. What was the Brickyard? A
It
club?
was, uh, boy, we played there with the High Fives, and there was a period there where there were booking shows. One of the guys who worked at Play It Again would set up the shows there. He was in a band, but I can't recall which. That was There was like an industrial area in the center of Allentown, and it was just a weird old industrial space that might have been, I don't know, a lumber yard or something at some point. And yeah, so for a few months there were shows there.
I would say that that couldn't have happened because we were a band called Congress of Cal, but we played one show as that band out of state, and that was in God damn it, I talked about it in Steve Goat's interview. It was in Pennsylvania. It was this kid's backyard. He had a skate park, and we played one chord, and the power died, and then they just didn't do
Oh,
anything to fix it. Yeah,
those are the best kind of shows. Yeah.
it was. We talked so much shit about this band for so many years. Then I think Steve connected us, and I was like, yeah, dude, sorry for being such a dick back then. Kobe, that was the kid's name, and or Colby, Colby or Kobe.
Oh, okay. I think I know exactly who that is.
Yeah, he had a band where they had a
Mhm.
girl singer, I believe.
Yes.
He played bass.
Yes.
Yeah, it was at his house. So we played there as Congress of Cow, and then ended up going that night to some club where it was us playing in front of Shower with the Goats and vice versa. But there was a 80s metal band that opened called uh the oh my God, I'm totally fucking this up. But I thought the Hippos. And I thought it was the actual Hippos, so I thought we were driving to this giant show. It was gonna be this huge thing. Ended up not being the Hippos, and there was no one there. So that was the only time we played as that. But as Lane Meyer, we formed as Lane Meyer. In '97, we came up with a name, and then went into '98 as Lane Meyer. So if that was the case, and you guys broke up in '96, then
It very well could have been 97.
okay.
Uh, yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but
Because okay,
um,
Brickyard.
yeah,
I don't know how the hell I would figure that out.
if I remember right, we were about to change our name. We felt, we as teenagers had come up with a name that was fun and whatever, but it just too confusing, too long, and just not representative of the sound that we had. So we were about to do that. Then we were going to do some touring, and then that fell apart. And for me, I think I remember feeling that just we had done what we were going to do. Relationships begin and relationships end. I think it was almost something like a high school or college boyfriend or girlfriend, where it's that period where most people would have some sort of a change, relocating, finding a career, whatever the case is. So I had left the band shortly after that show. They went on to play as a band called the Tumblers for a number of years after, and put out some records and things like that, and did well for themselves.
It's interesting you were thinking of changing your name, especially if you had been established, quote unquote established for X amount of years, to do that, but then keep the same sound. Like that's hard. It's hard to transition people with you.
We didn't make things easy on ourselves. I think that uh, we had, again, we had come up with a name as young people before we kind of knew what it was that we were doing. And by the time we figured out who we were, that name didn't suit us much anymore. And it was tough to get people to pay attention just based on that name. Kevin always said when he was booking shows, he knew he'd have to repeat the name at least twice to whomever. They'd say, what? So there you go. It's time to do something about that. So that was the plan then, but they went on and did that band, and I moved on to Lancaster and eventually started a band with my younger brother and two other good friends of mine, and we had a great time. We put out four full lengths, a live DVD.
Wow.
A label in Japan picked us up, and they had distro through Warner Brothers. So that meant, and I'll back up. The band was called Sadaharu, and that was after Sadaharu O.
How you spell that?
Sadaharu.
Oh, yep, there you go. Yeah, on Spotify.
And that's a Japanese name. The Sadaharu O was like the Babe Ruth of Japan. So I think there was a moment where the Japanese audience kind of cared it just on the face of why is there an American band named with a Japanese word. The crazy part of that was we had made some little video and they were playing it on, I guess, the equivalent of an MTV or something like that in Japan. I have all these magazines that are like, Bouncing Souls and Judas Priest and Us, in these interviews and things. And they're all in Japanese. I can't read them, but to look at this magazine, you'd assume that we are much bigger than we were. And so that was a crazy time, but we got to tour all over the country many, many times and a lot of adventures. And I eventually, I met my wife at the Fireside Bowl in Chicago.
Oh, that's cool.
So, it's crazy times.
There's a video on YouTube. It's called It's Not Paranoia If They're Shooting Live Bullets. Was that you guys?
Yes.
So there's but it's on Guitar Hero.
Yeah, we had a song on Guitar Hero or some version of a Guitar Hero thing.
That's fucking nuts. Yeah, there's a video of some kid playing it. That's crazy.
Yeah, this was, let's say 2000 to maybe 2006 or 7. I'm fudging a couple years there. We were in Lancaster, and in Lancaster there was a really, really famous club called the Chameleon. And everybody came through there. So we opened for everybody. We became good friends with a lot of these people and would go on tour and this and that. But when a band like Every Time I Die would come through town, they would ask to play with us. When Coheed and Cambria came through, we would play with them and they became friends. And
oh, wow.
Our friend Chuck was their tour manager for a number of years. And he had a lot to do with this, but Claudio wore a Sadaharu t-shirt every night on stage for like a solid year. So these are the kind of like accidental DIY sort of things that happen, but it's all through that community. So same attitude we had in Lehigh Valley. These bands would come through if it's Since by Man, who was a great band on Revelation, our friends in a band called The Rise, who went on to have guys in Juliette Lewis's band and Trail of Dead, I think. Stay at our house.
Damn.
We'll make pasta and we'll hang out. So, and then around that time, Alternative Press was the big magazine.
Yeah.
And they took a liking to us. And they also had these other two bands. One was a band called the Pink Spiders, who had a moment on MTV. They were kind of a snotty, punky version of like Weezer, and I'm simplifying that. They're their own band and they're great. And another band called Letters Organize, who eventually went on to the label The Offspring had. But Alternative Press had booked them a little tour. And the tour kind of fell apart. And then Alternative Press was like, hey, can these guys just like live at your house for a while and you figure it out? And so all of a sudden we had like 9 dudes in this house with us. And we just started getting them shows and getting us shows with them and started touring together a lot. And then we did a tour on the West Coast with the Pink Spiders. By the time we were getting to the LA area, they kept having to kind of beg off the shows that we were on because Jerry Harrison from the Talking Heads wanted to cut a demo with them. And then they got picked up by, I think, Virgin or something like that. Rick Ocasek produced their record. They would say, like, hey, we're not going to make it to the show tonight. We got this showcase thing at the Viper Room, and meanwhile we're playing for per diems or whatever, but we were so excited for them. We knew they were going to make it. They had a great look and, great songs and a great attitude. Our singer, Jeff, ended up doing all of the package design and album art for their record, which came out on, again, I think it was Virgin or
Oh, wow.
Geffen or something like that. So that was a huge thing for all of us. So yeah, a lot of crazy adventures.
I can't believe I've never heard. I feel there's a couple times where I've been caught off guard where someone will say something where I'm like, I have never heard of this before, and then I go back, I'm like, wow, this thing was like, there was a big element there because I love Every Time I Die. Um, like, so if they're like, yeah, we want to play with you guys like that, and like Coheed, obviously they're gigantic.
Yeah, that was the reason for that. Every Time I Die, they're more like riffy parts. Their slower riffy parts sounded comparable to some of the things Sadaharu was doing. But beyond that, the first time they came to Lancaster and played the Chameleon, it was the Bronx and us and Every Time I Die and Poison the Well. And
Jesus.
so that was, I don't know, 2003 or something. So that was the height of a lot of that sort of a sound.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
place
yeah.
was mobbed, and the Chameleon was very resistant to kids, especially stage diving, but any kind of moshing or anything like that was frowned upon. And there were bouncers there that could be real knuckleheads. Every Time I Die was playing, something was happening the bouncers didn't like, and they stopped the show and asked the singer of Every Time I Die to say something. He's a really intelligent, really
Yeah,
hilarious
he's
guy.
fucking
And
hilarious.
he said something, and he phrased it to reference Point Break, the movie Point Break.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, the bouncers interpreted this as a death threat. So they like raided the stage, and we ended up, Every Time I Die, Poison the Well, and us all barricading ourselves into this green room as these bouncers are screaming they're going to kill these guys. So we're in there, we're all leaned against the door, and we're trying to keep these guys out. And it dawns on us, the Bronx is not here. The guys in the Bronx aren't here. Where are they? Are they out there getting beaten to death right now? How do we get out of here and help them? So the situation calms down, and we open up the back doors, which lead onto a main road in Lancaster, main downtown road. And there's the Bronx, completely oblivious. They have their van double parked. They have all the doors open in the van. They are blasting off the wall era Michael Jackson. They are dancing with open containers in the street. And I kid you not, like feet from where they were is the police station. Like any policeman that was standing, like you would have seen this dance party in the street. So not only didn't they get hurt, they didn't even know what happened. They had no idea. They were doing their own thing. So that was one of those kind of nights where we all became friends.
That's fucking hilarious. So it blows my mind that your first band goes through the beginning stages of what became the scene that I lived in, and
Right.
then you break from that and then go into Sadaharu, and then that band bleeds right into the 2000s. Like, it sounds like that meshed very well into that whole scene, but you said in the very beginning where you guys were embedded in that, but then it became, I don't think you said it this way, but it popped in my head as I usually call it, like this giant fashion show. And so you guys were bleeding into that, but then at some point, so it's like some bands had to go from the late 90s and then survive into the 2000s,
Right. Yeah.
but you got to leave that, start in a band that was just very well plugged into that sound, it sounds like, and were able to survive however you did
Well,
through that
from
time.
within the space of maybe 10 years or less, I went from my experience, I mean, from being in a band playing, hole in the wall places, like Unisound or wherever, and not having any expectation that we're going to do anything but have fun and make music with our friends and meet people and have adventures, to then being in a scene that is still called the same thing and seems to be the same thing, but you could play these sorts of shows and a label like Drive Thru Records would scoop you up.
Yeah.
There was a band, they're still around, called August Burns Red.
Hmm.
They were on the same label as Sadaharu, another Lancaster band. But, metalcore in that time, 2005, 6, whatever, huge stuff. So they got a deal with, I think, Solid State, and then went on to other things. And I think they've been nominated for a Grammy. I mean, it's nuts. So for me to kind of wrap my head around what all this grew into and what it could be, and especially something like Warped Tour. I had trouble kind of wrapping my head around it. And again, I never made it easy on myself, or none of the bands I did either with what we did. I mean, Sadaharu was heavy, but not a hardcore band. So the hardcore kids didn't really like us. We were always kind of just adjacent to whatever the sound was. Same thing with GE. You know, could we have been on a label like a Lookout or something like that? Possibly sound wise, I guess. Whether we were that good or not is someone else's choice. But it seemed like we were in the world but not of it sometimes.
Yeah, I 100% could see that. I mean, granted, I'm just learning about your last band, but just the way you're talking about it, it's like, yeah, you're in it, you're in that world, but you're not completely plugged into where the acceptance of the crowd, I guess, like what they were eating up, and you're like, well, we're kind of like that, but it's not. Like, I was just thinking about how, and when you guys break up as Grieving Eucalyptus is right around the time where Weston's Got Beat Up starts to blow up from a scene standpoint, and they're playing these bigger shows and starting to take off, but you're in the same scene as those guys, and I could see where you guys being on the same bill made complete sense. But they ended up going off and, going as far as they did, but it was at that point bigger than where you guys had left off.
Yeah, there definitely was more of an appetite in the mainstream for all of these bands and scenes, and it went from being, like I said at the beginning, just this thing that was known to so few, and especially with the internet, MySpace, these bands would just put their songs up on MySpace, and you could get a record deal from there. You could get definitely book shows through there, all these things. And that was a lot different than mailing cassettes and making long distance phone calls and printing zines and things like that. So all of those factors really changed things, where all of a sudden people really cared and were aware and participating in a larger sense than ever before. For me, it was always like, okay, we're getting to a point where this is not why I do this. This is so far removed from what I understand of like the Black Flag model of doing things. And so that was my problem, not being able to kind of wrap my head around it.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that. So real quick before we wrap this up, when did you finally leave Sadaharu?
We wrapped up band, I want to say 2007 or so. And I had gotten married a few years earlier. My wife and I opened an art gallery. We had spent ages and ages running record stores and booking shows. She was from the Detroit area and then moved to Chicago, where I met her. And we had always wanted to open our own record store. By the time we had the money and the decision to do that, we wanted it to be a record store but not have records. We wanted that kind of feel like you would get going into a store like Play It Again and chatting with the person behind the counter and finding this weird thing. But we didn't want it to be music necessarily, so we had an art gallery.
That's cool.
We took our wedding money instead of going to Tahiti or whatever, and we decided we don't want to work for other people and we want to do our own thing. And we built a DIY art gallery in Lancaster that we ran for many years.
Oh, that's dope.
And it was great. We were directly across the street from the Chameleon, so a lot of times the bands would come through. Again, if it's Every Time I Die or the Pink Spiders or a lot of these bands we were friends with, Coheed, they would come in and shop, and they were always supportive. So we kind of had a little built-in hub of people in addition to the other regular business that we had. So we were also showing sometimes artwork made by people who made album covers and album art. John Baisley from Baroness, we put on a solo show of his work. He had done records for a lot of like kind of the Relapse Records metal bands, like his band Baroness, and also Pig Destroyer and things like that.
Wait, this is the guy who did the Coalesce artwork?
Coalesce, probably.
Okay.
His art kind of is very fine line, looks like Pusshead a little bit, but it's definitely its own thing.
Okay.
The person, Portland from the band Nora, who did a lot of the art for all the records on Ferret.
Yeah. Yep.
Did a show with him.
Wow.
So we did a lot of that, and then that became like, okay, we've done as much as we can in Central PA. It's time to go to New York. That led to what I'm doing now, working in the art and auction world.
Yeah, I was wondering when you said that in the very beginning, I always connect the dots on where you were, where people were back in the day and how they got to where they are now. And it's just like the path just makes total sense after hearing all the past stuff. So as you were talking about the back in the day, I was like, I bet this makes so much sense, or it's leading towards making sense on where you are right now. So that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. And to go from playing, I mean, I know that for the Fireside Bowl is not, the greatest venue on the planet,
Oh,
but
I love that
that
place,
was
man.
like, it was an awesome space in this amazing retro bowling alley. And for me, in whatever I was, late teens, early 20s, to get there, like, okay, I'm in a band that got to Chicago. I didn't buy a plane ticket and go to Chicago. I'm supposed to be here. I'm hired to play a concert here,
Yeah.
um, so to get that far at that age was this big deal. And then fast forward, that being the place where, like, okay, all I have to do is make it back to some of the places that Grieving made it to, and then get farther beyond that,
Yeah.
and see what more there is to do. And I remember getting there within, the first 6 or 8 months we were a band. We had started touring out that far. A couple years later, that's where I met my wife. So it's a special place for me.
Real quick, what year was it that you met your wife?
That would have been 2003, I
Oh, okay.
believe.
All right. I was just thinking about like when we were playing out there in the Fireside because our last show was there in 2000 with the Wonder Years, not the punk, not the current Wonder Years, but the older Wonder Years with Brian Moss and the Lawrence Arms. We played there on our last tour. That was always my favorite play. When I knew we were playing the Fireside, I was like, oh my God, and it never disappointed. The place was always packed. The kids were always by everything. The vibe was just fantastic. Yeah, that spot was one of my absolute favorite places to play in the whole world. And just
Yeah. We,
yeah,
we played there with a lot of the math rock bands, especially the Chicago bands like Mile Marker and I think Sweep the Leg Johnny, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a number of others, which was more the sound that band had.
yeah. Wow, that's cool, man. Well, I am gonna wrap this up, but this was great. I this was really awesome. I really enjoyed this. All right, so before we go, two questions. One, what would you like to plug? And it could be anything that you're doing, or you could just throw the spotlight on someone that you know.
Let me give you two things if I could.
Sure.
One, my little brother Mikey has a record store called Mr. Suit Records, and that's in Lancaster, PA. Great record store. You can buy things online. You can buy things on eBay. He's on Instagram, all that stuff. So primarily vinyl. He's been around there for, boy, at least 12 years or so. And then my first book that I put out, I did with an artist we had shown at our gallery named Oliver Hybert. And he might be best known for doing some album covers and other artwork for the band The Flaming Lips. So his artwork is very psychedelic. If you like Peter Max and Family Dog posters from the Fillmore concerts from the 60s and things like that, his work is of that kind of a feel. But what was great is, I was offered a deal to write a book. So I did that with him, and he got Wayne from the Flaming Lips to write the foreword, and he got his friend Sean Lennon to write a little piece for the back. The book is all of his art and his work for different bands and other projects and things. So it's something I'm proud of. It's a first book of, I hope, many that I get to do.
What was his name again? I'm sorry, real quick.
Oliver Hybert,
Okay.
Hibert.
Hybert or I?
I.
Okay, yeah, he's got like the colorful wheel as his profile picture.
Yes.
Wow, it's 105,000 followers on Instagram. I'm gonna
Yeah.
follow him right
He's
now.
he's a he's a
Okay.
popular fellow.
And you
Um,
you were about to say something else, and I cut you off there.
no, I think that was it. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, I just followed your brother's record store too.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, man. Last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
That same DIY ethic of finding your own way and not waiting for the phone to ring or waiting for the opportunity from others. And that is experiencing things, learning things, meeting people. Um, I'm a little on the spectrum, so there's definitely times where I like, oh, I'm so happy to meet you, and let me tell you all about all these great things I'm doing, and I have to kind of calm down but I'd like to think it comes from a sincere place. But just meeting people and being decent to them, and all those things are they can follow you through any sort of industry. It doesn't have to be just music. Being easy and kind and thoughtful is nice. And with DIY, any job you do, it's probably easier than what you did in the scene that we were in that if you can book a fire hall and promote it and get kids to show up and pay the bands and deal with the sound system and make flyers and all that kind of stuff, you can probably handle just about anything else that comes your way. There might be more zeros behind the number, but it's the same batch of problems. It's the same problem solving. Those experiences that we all got really helped us find a way and find the ability in ourselves to know that we can do these things, and we'll figure it out.